Good afternoon. My name is Krzysztof Ostaszewski. I'm the Actuarial Program Director at Illinois State University. Welcome to this event. This is our, what we call Actuarial Research event, where we will be very happy to welcome Mary Pat Campbell, who is Vice President of Insurance Research at Conning, who is also a Fellow of the Society of Actuaries, member of the American Academy of Actuaries, and our really welcome guest for this presentation. So I say hello on behalf of the actuarial program. I would like to also ask Professor Seelinger to say hello on behalf of the Department of Mathematics. George.
So thank you very much for being here. It is an honor to have you give our actuarial research event presentation this year. We are looking forward to a very relevant and timely topic, and we are looking forward to your insights on that. So thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this event, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mary Pat, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Chris. So, COVID, I'm sure we're all sick of the topic by now, but have a very important angle as actuaries, whether you're a student, you're a current practicing actuary, or you're teaching actuarial science. COVID data follies on vaccination rates, relative risks in population, and how Simpsons Paradox, which occurs all the time in insurance work in relative risk, and came up in a big way in the last few months in arguments over whether vaccination is doing any good at all, or if it's actually making things worse. So I'm going to show you a graph. Let me see if I can, there we go. Oh no, the vaccinated are dying at higher rates. This was a graph that was shared just a few weeks ago. Not going to say who shared this. Someone made a big stink. This was shared on Twitter all over the place to prove that at least for people who weren't seniors, they really should stay away from vaccines that are dangerous. It's killing people. The reddish orange line is the death rate, all causes, not from COVID, but from all causes in the United Kingdom. And I just want to make a remark at how ugly this graph is. And in terms of someone put data labels on every single data point here, and you can barely tell the numbers. But let's just look at these line graphs. We can see that past a certain point, that red line is higher, and that's the death rates per 100,000 for the age range, age 10 to 59. After second vaccine shot, okay? And then the blue line are the death rates per 100,000 in the age range 10 to 59, not vaccinated. Excuse me for a moment. Could you go see Daddy, please? Okay. So you can see that's pretty level, and then we have this increased risk for the vaccinated group. This was being shown as proof that vaccination was dangerous. So I'm going to take a little detour from a professor in the UK who used the same data set to prove that the original Ghostbusters movie kills. Okay, so the 1984 Ghostbusters movie, okay, that came out. I was 10 years old at the time, so if you do the math, I'm 47 now. So in the range age 10 to 59, the people who in that age range saw only the original 1984 Ghostbusters, and I'm in that group, would have a higher death rate than those who only have seen the 2021 Ghostbusters movie. Okay. For all-cause mortality 2 times. Now, yes, he's just making up the data, okay? This is not based on anything real. And that's actually pretty par for the course, for COVID, but he actually has a point to make, which we'll get to in a couple slides. Okay. And he's actually using the same logic and argumentation that the original person who was tweeting this, who came up with that original graph with the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, and saying they're hiding this data. We're told that it was safe, this 1984 Ghostbusters, but it's really killing people. If we looked at the age distribution, but now he's actually getting away from the original person who was tweeting, because once you get into this level of analysis, you see where the difference is coming from. This is also made up data, but it's actually based somewhat in reality. Who's seen only the 1984 Ghostbusters? So that's going to be these blue columns. That's going to skew older, okay? Now, he's just making up the numbers to make his example work. These are fake numbers, because he's going to demonstrate how you can get the numbers to come out similar to what the graph is for vaccinated versus unvaccinated, because there's an age distribution difference for those as well. Okay, so you see that those who've only seen the 1984, it's mainly going to be older people. Those who've only seen the 2021, well, that's going to be more, here's our 10 to 14-year-old, 15 to 29-year-olds. It's more younger people. If we add on the mortality rate differences for these different age groups, without thinking that there's any difference at all between having seen the movie or not, just the fact that they have different age distributions gives you a different overall expected mortality. And that's really where Simpsons Paradox comes from. You're comparing expected values, you're comparing ratios, you're comparing, you're taking weighted averages, essentially, of two different populations that have different underlying risk profiles. This happens all the time in insurance. We have to be very careful when we do underwriting, when we're trying to make sure our risk classes for the specific risk class we have is pretty homogeneous within that risk class. We don't want to have such a very strong difference, in risk profile. We don't want to have, with mortality, age is the number one, risk factor. It's very steep, and we'll see that, especially for age 10 to 59 in the future. We'll see a graph of that to come. And this is where Simpsons Paradox shows up with respect to these different mortality rates. So the example I'm actually going to step back to, and this is why I was originally invited some months ago. I didn't just get invited last week when or a couple weeks ago when I first saw these recent graphs, but I knew there would be more bad data and bad graphs and bad reasoning about risk along shortly, because all you have to do is wait a week or two, the last couple years, and another stupid take would be along any moment now. I'm sure next week I'll see yet another bad graph telling me that something that is adding risk that has actually no effect whatsoever either way. Here's an example from Israel. And what's great about Israel is they have very, very detailed data. They had an extensive vaccination program in their country, and they have kept the data and have been reporting the data at a level that we're able to disaggregate it the way we want to. The big problem with, and I'll just go back, the big problem with the graph of this 10 to 59, it really wasn't, it kind of was the fault of the person who took the ratios and said, hey, look, these people are dying at twice the rate of this other group, that's actually how the data were reported in these groupings of age 10 to 59. The Office of National Statistics in England was reporting in these very, very broad groups, which kind of made sense because barely anybody's dying in those groups. Most of the deaths are coming over age 60. But, you know, people are making a big deal over very small differences. Okay, so we're changing from deaths to severe cases, so where you have to be hospitalized. So this was for a very specific period in Israel. For these slides, I've asked Chris to share these slides with all of the attendees after this presentation. By the way, each of my slides has a link. I did a post myself. I also have, and this will be at the end of the presentation, I have a spreadsheet that you guys can download. We'll have all of the graphs, etc., in there that you can use yourself. And the original source of the data. The Israeli dashboard, of course, is in Hebrew, the official language of Israel. I don't speak Hebrew. I also provide the link to where I got the data from somebody else who translated it from Hebrew into English. In any case, so we look at severe COVID cases in Israel. The case count was not actually very high. This is for the entire country. So 300 and 200 and change. So not vaccinated versus vaccinated. So you start out at this very simplistic level. So for the normally numerate, which is pretty innumerate, oh my gosh, there's more vaccinated than not vaccinated. And I have been seeing a lot of stories like this. Especially the most recent case wave that occurred in Florida. Oh, you know, it's mainly vaccinated people who are being hospitalized or who have cases of COVID. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, of course, because most of the people being hospitalized with COVID are old. And the vaccination rate for old people in Florida, and actually most states in the US, is very, very high. You can go to vaccination dashboards for the rates, and they're very high. The vaccination rates are low for young adults and kids, not for old people. In any case, we'll see that's what happened in Israel as well. We know as actuaries, and we're not even into Simpsons Paradox area here, we need to know what the base rates are to compare here. If I go to the population in Israel, we see far more people are vaccinated than not vaccinated. And again, these are comparable periods. When I originally did this, they were comparing, you know, how many were vaccinated at the time versus severe cases at the time. And we're just going to assume the data definitions are proper. You know, it's stable on who's defined as being vaccinated. It's the proper, I can't remember what it's called, but you know, the proper latency period after being vaccinated and that kind of thing. Okay, so now this is basically, this is called the base rate fallacy, where you're not, the original where we're just saying the percentage of severe cases was about 60% of the severe cases were vaccinated people. And if we didn't compare what percentage of the population was vaccinated, we would be committing the base rate fallacy. Okay, but we can go beyond that to do comparisons, but at the very least, we would want to be doing it a proper rate. What is the severe case rate per 100,000 population or whatever, you know, population, vaccinated versus not vaccinated? So that's what I calculated. Now that we have it as a rate, so this is similar to mortality rate, but now this is a severe case rate. So we see that there's a 67% risk reduction. Now, there is a big assumption going in here, and someone pointed this out to me when I did this initial graph. Okay, but just vaccinated versus not vaccinated, having the rate, compared against the size of the population that's vaccinated and how many are severe cases, we see a big risk reduction. Now, someone pointed out there is an implicit assumption in here when I do these rates, and that is that the reason people are or are not vaccinated has nothing to do with their risk of getting a severe case of COVID. And that may not be true. The reason some people don't get vaccinated is they can't get vaccinated due to their health condition. I know my own husband can't get certain vaccines because he's a cancer patient, for example. Actually, I can't get certain vaccines because my husband's a cancer patient. So, that's some of the kinds of things. So there may be things that make these not equal risk groups. So it might not be a fair comparison for risk reduction. That said, there are limitations always in our analysis. We do the best we can. Okay. 67% risk reduction, but can we do better? Yes. This is like one of those infomercials. Yes, we can do better. Okay. So now we actually have the data from Israel at a better granularity. We don't just have vaccinated versus unvaccinated data. We do have some age, some age numbers. 12 to 50 and 50 plus. I called it, young and old. And doing the same kind of calculations, now we see an 85% risk reduction for the old bin and a 92% risk reduction. And these are all relative risk reductions for the 12 to 50. Now, and this is where we're starting to see the Simpsons Paradox effect coming into play. When we combine these two groups, we see a 67% risk reduction. When I did this not vaccinated versus vaccinated, this per 100,000 population, this is for all age 12 and over. That's over all the population that was eligible to be vaccinated. So this is for age 12 and older, not vaccinated versus vaccinated. I saw a 67% risk reduction here, but if I split it out, for each of these subpopulations, I get a higher percentage risk reduction than when I combined them, okay? And we're going to see that also if we subdivide it further. So we do actually have it in decadal groupings. So 12 to 15, 16 to 19, et cetera. And I put a gray line for comparison across at the age 50 to 59 unvaccinated severe case rate as a comparison. And the reason why I did that is I wanted to show that the age 90 plus risk rate, severe case rate, was the same, or similar as the 50 to 59. Okay. And this is something that I've been wanting to show. There is a very severe age curve, whether it's severe cases or mortality risk, that even when you have essentially a 90% or 80% to 90% relative risk reduction, there's still a lot of risk left. Okay. You never get to zero. The risk is already higher for very old people. Reducing the risk is great. And, the argument I have been having with individuals I've been trying to encourage to get vaccinated, it's a lot more urgent for older people. They have the highest risk. And other people with certain comorbidities. You have the highest risk, and 80 to 90% risk reduction is appreciable. So, you never will get to 0% risk, though. There's, there's always some risk to life. You can't escape risk. So anyway. Okay, so when I do a graph of that percentage risk reduction, and that's what my blue bars are here on this graph, they're all well above that overall 67% population-wide risk reduction. So this is kind of, again, the Simpsons paradox. Has to do with when I aggregate them all. I can't simply just aggregate each of the individual one and it's some kind of weighted average between them. That's not how it works. And that's because, of course, the amount of weights on each of them is not equal. The amount of risk for each of these groups is not equal. There's some huge disparities in the amount of risk. This is a huge amount of risk for this 90 plus group. There's a little bit of a bobble going on with this 80 to 89 with vaccinated. The other thing, and I'm not even showing the actual numbers here, you can go back to my original sources and you can see the number of people involved, because these are all rates, of course, and not the actual number of people. The older you get up here, of course, there aren't quite so many people alive for you to be applying these rates to. And so the data do get sparse. You start having a credibility problem. There's a lot of noise that creeps in while you're trying to do your analysis. And I've tried to explain this to people when they're trying to compare different states or different counties or different cities in the United States. And I've had to explain, look, I am not going to compare a 2-week period in Miami, Florida, again, that kind of thing. There's really not enough deaths to do certain comparisons. And then I explained there's a reason New York City could split off weekly deaths because of just how large the base population is and the expected number of deaths per week. Some states, there are entire states that have populations less than the population of New York City and don't have enough expected deaths. I actually have to aggregate over a very large time period to get enough deaths that the noise doesn't drown it out so that I can try to estimate excess mortality. And I will generally only do analysis for very large states and very large populations. I'm not going to do it. I'm definitely not going to do it when it's only a few deaths or a few dozen deaths that are going to make a big difference in terms of rates. These are not conversations I've been enjoying having, mainly because people have some kind of political axe to grind usually. Okay, Simpsons Paradox. So getting back to the heart of the matter, I actually want to go to one of my favorite examples of Simpsons Paradox and actually get away from death and get away from COVID, because I used to teach. So I used to teach at University of Connecticut. I used to teach at NYU as well. And one of the classes I used to teach was an introduction to statistics. And I always use this classic Simpsons Paradox example, which had to do with the graduate admissions at the University of California at Berkeley in the 1970s. This was a research paper that purported to show sex bias in graduate school admissions. And the initial paper showed that men had an appreciably higher acceptance rate in the graduate school of sciences at Berkeley, or not maybe sciences, but just kind of overall at Berkeley in 1973, 44% versus 35% for women. So ta-da, it was statistically significant and all that jazz. Well, okay, this isn't much of a result in terms of anyone who has, applied for graduate school you don't get accepted or rejected by the entire university. You apply to a program. You get accepted or rejected by the program, the specific department for the graduate program, not by the entire university. So this was aggregating way too much. And they did realize they had to disaggregate the data. But there was a problem when they disaggregated the data, and basically the sex bias went away, or it totally reversed direction, which was a little embarrassing for their statistical results. So to reduce the embarrassment for everybody involved, they did not identify the departments. They just named them stuff like A, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay, these are the 6 largest departments. You'll see these numbers don't match up with the earlier ones. That's because these are just the largest departments. And I'll talk about that in a moment. I highlighted in yellow for each of these rows which group had the higher percentage. And we can take a look at what's going on here. And actually, I meant to highlight this one here for the total for the 6 largest departments. So for overall, so for these 6, 4 of the 6, women had the higher acceptance rate and men had it for 2. But overall, there's this 15 percentage point difference. And of course, when you look at it row by row, you start seeing what the issue is. Let's look at row A. So in row A, women had a 20 percentage point higher acceptance rate for Department A. But look at how many applicants there were. There's about 8 times, less than 8 times, but 8 times as many men as women applying to Department A. Then for B, we have an even worse disparity. Okay, there's almost no difference between men and women here, just 5 percentage points difference, but there's a huge disparity in number of applicants. What was happening was that men were applying to these departments that had relatively high acceptance rates, and women were more often applying. So let's look at C. C, there were more women applicants and they had a slightly lower admission rate. And if we look at E, there were more women applicants and they had a slightly lower admission rate there too. So women were applying to these departments that had lower admission rates, and men were applying to various departments that tended to have higher admission rates. Someone went back and kind of guessed at what departments these were. So some of them, I'll just make a guess. C, I'm thinking was education or psychology. A and B were probably something that more was science related, science and engineering. That in general, that you had people would be applying only if they knew that they qualified, kind of thing, versus education. A lot of people do graduate programs in education because if they're public school teachers, if you get a master's or a doctorate, you get an automatic bonus or raise in your salary if you're a public school teacher. So you might get a lot more applicants than there are positions for students, kind of thing. So this is the quintessential Simpsons Paradox situation where you have 2 subpopulations. So it's not like a bunch of different subpopulations. We have male and female, 2 subpopulations where when you aggregate them over everything, the averages go one way, but you can set it up. And with this real data situation, it's a mix, but you can mathematically set it up so that for each subpopulation, the average went the other ways, that the women always had a higher acceptance rates. But if you had them distributed differently among different groups, then you end up with if women were mainly applying to departments with very low acceptance rates and men were applying to departments with very high acceptance rates, then you can get a very unbalanced overall aggregate result. So, the big lesson here is do not prematurely aggregate. This is very simplified. And this came from Wikipedia, of course. 8 points, which are obviously in 2 lines. If we aggregated all 8 points together and did a linear fit, the line would be a negatively correlated, negatively trending line going down and to the right. Will give us a negative correlation, but if we subdivided it appropriately, we'd have 2 positively trending lines. Simpsons Paradox was actually, unfortunately, poorly named. Yes, there was a Simpson, but there's also a Yule, Y-U-L-E. They co-authored a paper together where they described this situation. And a lot of it had to do with doing statistical studies where you're looking at basically correlations of effects. So if you did a statistical significance test here, and it said it's statistically significant at this aggregated level, this is obviously very different means. And it's statistically significant. The sample size is, large enough. But it's a correlation and not a causation. When you got to the level where the decisions were actually made, it became a lot messier. And this is something to keep in mind, especially as we're getting more and more into data science approaches, which is really yet another repackaging statistics. It's just that we have more powerful technological tools and bigger data sets. We had a version of this in the 90s. We called it data mining. It was, different statistical tools were available at the time, but we keep running into the same statistical problems if you don't think about what underlying structures may be in your data, what meaningful stuff is in there. If you're prematurely aggregating or there's heterogeneity in your data and you're trying to tease out risk categories, we could be running into trouble again. And this is something that as actuaries, we need to be very well aware about. I think the actuarial profession is on top of this. The American Academy of Actuaries has a working group that's working with the NAAC, by the way. And the NAAC, the regulators are definitely well aware of potential bias that is in the approaches in automated underwriting and some other data science approaches. However, some of it is built into the statistics itself. If we don't really think about, what we're doing. This is something that the original paper, this paper about Berkeley, this is from the 70s, of course. Yule and Simpson's own papers are from the 1950s. And these kind of observations in statistics occurred earlier in the 20th century as well, as they were developing the ideas of, tests of statistical significance and other things. This correlation is not causation is absolutely true, but there's all sorts of pitfalls in strength of correlation and hypothesis testing. Okay, moving along, back to death. Okay, so getting back to the United Kingdom. So they have a vaccination rate dashboard. And let me see, I tried to pull the most recent data I had for the vaccination rates in the UK. We can see the trajectories of how vaccination rates have gone. And I've seen similar trajectories when you've had it broken out by age groups. And it can differ by country, but in general, we've seen most countries providing the oldest age groups, because as we've seen, there's a huge risk differential by age. The oldest having first access, and so we see that steepest curve, but it becomes saturated at a certain point. What's interesting to me, and so here's 60 to 69, 50 to 59, it's kind of a rank ordering here. It's interesting, it does seem to me that a lot of the younger age groups become saturated at lower points. And I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with vaccine supply in a country like England, and definitely not the United States. In some other countries, perhaps. But you can see like it just becomes available or, approved for younger children at various points. And there are some crossover ones, like so 18 to 24 may cross over 25 to 29 because they may need to get vaccinated for access to universities, say. So that might be interesting comparing those take-up rates. So here's a mortality curve. And this is from males in the UK from age 10 to 59, that range that we're looking at for vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Yeah, it starts near 0. And I think they're just using decimals. So this is not per 100,000. And we start from near 0 to, 0.7, it looks like 0.7% at age 59. So that's quite the climb. It's definitely starting, you see the force of mortality kicking in there. Quite a different level of mortality risk. And this is, as far as I can tell, this is pre-pandemic mortality curve that he's using there. I grabbed this from, Stuart McDonald, who's a UK actuary. And I provide all my sources, as I said, on the bottom here, but also at the end of my slides. And he faked up, these are, again, fake numbers, but this is intended to be an example to show how you can have the deaths be about the same, but because the vaccination rates differ, you end up with this 200% ratio. So yeah, 10 to 29 versus 30 to 59. And that you have different numbers of people. So of the unvaccinated, okay, for 10 to 29, he has it about equally split between unvaccinated and vaccinated for the 10 to 29 group. And then for 30 to 59, he has a lot more of them vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And obviously, when you aggregate these, then you end up with very different results in terms of number of deaths. Okay, so lesson time. And here comes the professionalism for those of you who are the credentialed actuaries and just need a few minutes of professionalism, because I'm going to mention actuarial standards of practice. I've been really plugging ASOP 23, which is data quality, this year and last year too. So I've been mentioning know your data, know what's missing and if it might be significant. So the problem with what had been happening with these graphs, going back to here, these numbers are made up. Those numbers are real. Those numbers are real. The problem is the Office of National Statistics in England, in the UK, were not providing a breakout of that 10 to 59 group in terms of vaccinated versus unvaccinated deaths, and that was causing trouble. We don't get that in the US either, by the way. So when I have been looking at CDC death data overall, this is what I get. I can get various slices, so I can get total number of deaths. I can get COVID, not COVID. Okay. And I get it by week. I can get it by state. And these are all preliminary numbers. I can get it by age range. I can get it by race, but I can't get it by age and race. Well, I can, but I can't. I mean, the thing is, there are certain slices I can't get. I definitely can't get deaths by vaccinated versus unvaccinated. They don't take that data, not for the whole US. They do have research studies where it's specific hospitals, but then it's just that specific hospital. And then I don't have a base population I can really compare it to. So I don't really have a rate. I just have numbers. And what am I going to do with that? That makes it difficult. So I've been having a lot of missing information. I can't do, this is why I had to go to Israel to actually be able to do the analysis to explain to people what they really need to be looking at. And then I had to say, well, I'm sorry. And this is what Stuart McDonald had to do. He had to make numbers up. He said these are reasonable looking numbers, but ONS wasn't reporting numbers this way. He had a talk with somebody, and this is COVID Actuaries. It's an actuarial group in the UK. And they've been putting out weekly reports, and they've been talking with various government entities, and they convinced them that the next report that came out, could you please disaggregate the data in this particular way? And ONS said, sure, we'll do that. So hopefully the next report, when it comes out, and I think it comes out monthly, we'll have that disaggregation. Yay. But and this is that people have been finding their way. I've actually been pretty impressed with regards to the data I have been able to get over the last couple of years, just because I know how difficult it is to get good data. People don't think about the amount of work that goes into collecting this data. If any of you on this call are readers of my blog, you may know I have been complaining about my home state of North Carolina and their reporting of mortality data. They still use paper to report to the CDC. They're the only state that does that, by the way, currently. But I'm actually pretty impressed that the reporting lag is actually pretty short for almost all the states, except for North Carolina, which is a disgrace. But other than North Carolina, it's actually done pretty well. The CDC has improved its reporting of the mortality data over the last couple years. They have been releasing reports more rapidly. They have improved some of the data releases. They've been getting data up on their Wonder database more rapidly. So I've noticed, way to go, CDC, about that at least. Anyway, the keep an open mind about possibilities. This is kind of a much higher level comment. I could connect it to Simpsons Paradox and don't prematurely aggregate, but most of my frustration has come from talking with people who are torturing the data because they want to get a specific result out of it. These are not actuaries I'm talking with, obviously. But these are people who say, well, how would I, get this out of the data? And I'm just like, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to go do the analysis that is going to get me the proper rate answers, and then I will interpret what comes out of it. I am not looking for a specific answer. I am looking for the answer, whether I like it or not. And that's the thing. A lot of people have been looking for things, but only if they like it. Part of being an actuary is being aware we may come across answers we don't like. In general, the actuarial profession, not just in the US, but the UK, obviously, but in other places, have done very well over the past few years, and I think it's because we are pretty inured to looking at some pretty ugly data and some rather ugly data and having to tell some ugly messages to people who don't want to hear it. We're used to it. And it got really ugly. It's been very ugly. I'm sorry, guys, we're not popular. There's no two ways about it. But it meant I'm not surprised, but it is very frustrating to have to deal with it. So integrity is hard won, and this is one of the great things about the actuarial profession is we are known for our integrity, and it took a long time for our profession to build that up. Various groups have lost their integrity over the past couple years because, again, looking for the answer people want to hear as opposed to forthrightly saying, I know you guys don't like to hear this, but this is what the data are. This is what it says. Deal. The actuarial standards of practice, the two I had in mind specifically are 23, which is data quality, and then our newest one, 56, just modeling. For the students, I don't know if you've heard of ASOPs. I'm going to take a very quick detour. I used to teach at the University of Connecticut, and in the course I taught, part of it was on professionalism, and I would talk about our code of conduct in the United States and the actuarial standards of practice. And I usually covered two because the ASOP 56 didn't exist yet. My top 3 ASOPs, and these should be the top 3 for all actuaries in the US, are ASOP 23, which is data quality, ASOP 41, which is actuarial communication, and ASOP 56, which is modeling. These actuarial standards of practice in the code of conduct are core to our professionalism. They're very high level and they're very short. They help ground you in the principles of, what are we about the quality of the work we do. Why are we better than the data scientists? But what's the core of what we're about? ASOP 23, which is data quality purpose. Purpose of this ASOP is to provide guidance to the actuary when performing actuarial services involving data. There has been a lot of sloppiness around data with regards to COVID in terms of public discussion around data. Before we started this session and people came on, I was talking about one of the biggest frustrations I've had was some of the arguments I've had with people or explanations I've had with people of just explaining the distinction between when a death is reported and when it actually happened. When people have been seeing various dashboards, I have been yelling at a lot of people who make those dashboards of deaths based on when the deaths were reported, because it's easier for them. Thank goodness the CDC does not do this. They do it based on when the death occurred because that's meaningful to the kind of analysis we need to do. And you don't end up with absurdities like negative deaths. But I kept having to explain to people that no, you don't have fewer people dying on the weekends. It's just that the people who report the deaths aren't working on the weekends. So you have fewer reported on the weekends. That's all. Plenty of people die on the weekends. Okay, guys? And there were other data issues like that. And I discovered right away I could not spend much time at all with regards to anything sophisticated with regards to data when I had to keep going back to extremely basic things. But going back to the basic things really got it clear. What am I talking about? What am I looking at? One of the things that I really had to become clear on, and we keep having to become clear on, is what does it mean to be vaccinated? Because unfortunately, when I look at these data, I need to be clear when I pull data that I know what they mean by vaccinated. Do they mean, which vaccines? How many shots? Is it at least 1? 2? Do they need to have had a booster within a certain amount of time? Okay, you need to be clear about that kind of thing. So data definitions, that's part of data quality. Know what the data mean. For data quality, we're not expected to audit the data, but we are expected to, be aware of the kind of pitfalls that exist in data, to understand what our data mean. There's certain aspects of this that should be best practices for anybody who works with data. I have been promoting the ASOPs, ASOP 23 and ASOP 56, to non-actuaries. So even if you never become credentialed, I highly recommend following these. Say you peel off into data science, look at the ASOP 23 for data quality. Okay, a lot of bad things in data science occur because people don't do reasonability checks on their data, or think about how do they deal with missing data or corrupted data, or aspects of the data, like do they check that they really understand what's going on with their data? Okay, that's data quality. Enough of that. Okay, and then ASOP 56, which is modeling, and you may be thinking, well, where's the modeling in all of this? So here we go. Designing, developing, selecting, modifying, using, reviewing, or evaluating models. Whew. That's a lot of stuff. Modeling, people think that modeling has to be really involved, but no, it does not. Modeling can be something as simple as just fitting a line to something. So looking at a correlation is essentially a model. The concept of a model in ASOP 56 is very comprehensive. It covers predictive modeling, it covers statistical modeling, and not just cash flow modeling. So both ASOP 23 and ASOP 56 actually apply to the examples I'm showing here. So if you're thinking through, did vaccines actually make people age 10 to 59 more likely to die in England? No, it didn't. That's really a question of, do you understand what's in that data? What key data were they missing? And what model of how the cause effect chain? There is an implicit model there. But again, no actuary made this mistake. It wasn't an actuarial mistake. So, pat ourselves on the back. Okay. So to close up, those are my prepared remarks. I have resources with a variety of links. So my sources on the data, other people who have written about it, there's my own post, again, why I was invited to talk about this. But Jeffrey Morris, of course, I mainly got the data from him. And I just like my graphs better than his tables. So, I redid it. I have the spreadsheet in case you want to play around with it yourself and do your own visualizations. If there's not much to it. And then if you'd like to see some of my other stuff, I've been writing about a lot of mortality stuff for quite some time. I've been blogging on public finance and public pensions for over a decade, in addition, and some other actuarial things as well. So you can find me online very easily. So I will take it back to any Q&A people may have.
So if you would like, you can type questions in the chat, or please speak your mind if you have questions.
I had a question. This is Richard Bill. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I guess the CDC does put out, a vaccinated versus unvaccinated deaths, and shows 92% reduction. They get this from, I guess, 22 states do break it out by age, and and so they do show a graph that shows that, and it's called age adjusted vaccine or death rates. So I'm just curious, how would maybe you could explain how you do age adjusted? You showed the different age groups and stuff. So how would you put that all together as age adjusted?
Right. So for age adjusted death rates, of course, you have to decide what weights you're going to use. Age adjusted, that could be adjusted to anything. And I'm just sitting here like, I did a post on that. Most of the time for age adjusted death rates, and this is what they probably did. There's a standard one they like to use for, the CDC likes to use, and it's based off of around the year 2000. I'm just trying to find it, but so it's just basically, it's a standard set of weights. They usually do it by decadal age groups, and they just use the same set of weights. You calculate, and it depends on how fancy they get it, but for something like this, usually they'll just do a crude death rate for the decadal age group, and then just do the weighted average based on the standard weights, and they'll do it for one grouping and then do it for the other grouping. For something this rapid, because they won't have had a lot of time to do any how shall we say, to finesse, like, do central rates and smoothing and some other stuff. The Society of Actuaries has had people do a couple of different looks at how we might want to measure, say, excess death rates coming from COVID. Like, do you trend off of other things? And because we already had a mortality trend going on, and do you use that trend? And there's a lot of different choices you can make. So then they show 4 different things you could have done. I've been telling people at the SOA that we are going to be getting decades worth of research off of the data that'll be coming out of these years. But yeah, for something that's going to come out rapid from the CDC, they'll probably just take a crude rate in like 10-year buckets, age buckets, and then just have a standard set of weights that they'll do. And it'll be based off of something that's close to the year 2000 age distribution.
Yeah, it'd just be population by the weights would be population.
Yeah, the weights are based off of the population, and the standardized population is usually somewhere from the early 2000s.
Yeah. Okay.
And it could be you can do an age adjusted. They really should come up with a new set of weights soon, because that's getting really old. The one that they've been using for it's 20 years in the past now. So we should be getting some new weights soon, and we'll be having ICD 11 soon, our new set of death codes, starting next year. So that would be a great time to have new weights, I think. That's my opinion. Thanks. Okay, sure. I'm just trying to see if I can find. The problem is I've written so much about this.
Okay, so I will just make a comment that I want everybody to know that we will have a recording of this presentation and the PowerPoint presentation available for you. They will be posted on the Actuarial Program website in the events part, and in terms of presentation, I'll be very happy to send it to you. In case I forget to send to anybody, you can just send me an email asking for it just email actuary@ilstu.edu. And I'm sorry, please, Mary Pat, about U.S. death trends.
I just found the link, and I'll drop the link in the chat. So I did find the graph I did of the age-adjusted death rate using the 2000 standard weights. So that's the gray. And then the crude death rate, which is the orange. And yes, I've started the vertical scale at 700 because I wanted to show what the 2020 rates would look like. I did a preliminary estimate on there, so you can kind of see how drastically that jumped up, both for the age adjusted and the crude. The 2020 official numbers should be coming out soon when they upload that at the CDC Wonder database. But yeah, I know that they will have done that in there. I have been seeing in the, what is it, the weekly mortality, is it the MMWR or whatever, that the CDC puts out, the weekly mortality reports, and that they do some estimates that come out preliminarily that are based off of like certain regions or certain hospitals and do estimates. There was some weird ones. There was one weird one that came out that was for vaccinated people that showed that vaccinated people had an all-cause mortality rate lower. Or no, not all-cause, non-COVID mortality rate that was lower than unvaccinated people. And I'm just like, oh God, that was not a good thing, because that may indicate the kind of people who don't get vaccinated. Well, why don't they get vaccinated? There may be socioeconomic reasons. There may be, they have other health problem reasons that, so I'm not sure they were showing what they intended to show, were the vaccines weren't causing health problems, but then they just kind of confused the matter further. That there may be confounding issues. I mean, this is the problem when you have these correlational studies. I am sure that for the specific network of hospitals in the study, I'm sure the statistics were just as they said, but the causal aspect is what I'm calling into question.
Because you're saying that the factors that cause people to have some bad health issues could be the same factors that cause them to not get vaccinated.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I don't know why. This is the thing. It's like, I don't know. The problem is the intention of the study. I think when you looked at the bullet points at the top, I think the whole point is they were trying to indicate that getting vaccinated was safe, because people were trying to say, oh, you're gonna get a heart attack and die from getting vaccine. But what they called into question was like, wait a second, this doesn't even begin to make sense unless there might be other things going on. So like it was kind of, it was a correlational study. It was an observational study. So we don't know what caused it. And that's the problem. It didn't really prove anything other than this was an interesting factoid. And I mean, it's interesting. I find it interesting, but I don't know why it's that way. And then it just caused more confusion. And if you wanted to use this to convince people to get vaccinated, well, you can't, because there's no cause effect chain there. It's just, of the people who got vaccinated, they had lower non-COVID mortality. We don't know why. For all I know, it's geographic. I don't know. It might have been a timing thing. You can't control for all the variables as part of the problem, so it's just like, this is the whole issue with the Simpsons Paradox. So can people see that link in the chat?
Yes.
Yeah, so you guys could click on that and then you can see. It might ask you to subscribe, but just ignore that. This is free. My blog, the only thing, like if you want to pay, it's just so that you can leave comments. because I don't like moderating comments. So I'm just like, if you make me have to read your comments, then you have to pay. But other than that, you just want to read me? Sure, you can read me for free. That's great. But yeah, so that, for most of these I have, like, let me just see. Yeah, I go through a very simplified example of how age adjusted rates are calculated there, just so that people can see. And I've just started, and if you go to the YouTube link from the slides, so when Chris shares the slides with y'all, it's this MEEPS Math Matters have been on there for a very long time. I just started going through using the CDC Wonder database to show people how they can get data out of the CDC database for themselves. In case you want to join me in looking at mortality data too. I've been doing this for some time, actually some years ago, after a goose decided to impale itself on my windshield. I actually looked up all of the collision with an animal data in the system. So that was interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there if you want to go look that up. Anyway.
Any other questions? Well, then I think that this was very educational, very interesting. I'm very grateful on behalf of everybody. We appreciate it. I'll work on getting the files ready for everyone. And thank you so much. And all the best with future counting of all the dead people and alive people. We appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. See y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you.
See,
All the
I
best.
do other things than count dead people too,
Well, yeah, but this is important work.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? It's so, I was gonna say it's so foundational, but it's a lot more complicated than people realize. It's
Yes.
Again, I didn't realize how frustrating it was going to be just arguing over counting dead people. It's just been amazing. I look forward to when things calm down and I can get more into the intricacies of analyzing the trends. But yeah, it's been an eye-opener.
Yeah.
Calming down is a hard thing to do. I'm trying to start with myself. So thank you very much again.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, all the best. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.